Thanks very much. It's great to be here today. I want to just start by very briefly recapping on the extent of the problem that we face, what we call the socioeconomic attainment gap. I think it's worth noting that when you look across developed countries, the UK has one of the strongest links between your social and economic background and your academic attainment of any of those countries. We're quite unusual in having quite high overall attainment, but a big gap depending on essentially where you come from and what your family background is. And it starts, as we know, incredibly early. So from the earliest time we can measure children's development, you can see a gap between richer and poorer children. By the time they get to be 5, poorer children will already be around 8 months behind in terms of development. And we see that gap widening more and more all the way through primary school and most of secondary school. And what we see by the end of compulsory schooling is this very stark gap. So only about a fifth of the poorest fifth of children are going to leave school with 5 good GCSEs, whereas 3/4 of the richest fifth are going to be able to do that and have all the opportunities that opens up to you. So that's an incredibly stark gap. It's something that, despite all the attention for the last 10 years at least, it's been very hard to actually significantly narrow that gap. Of course, we know that once you leave school with very few or no qualifications, that then has tremendous effects on your likelihood of working, what kind of job you're going to get, all the way through your life, and that's one of the biggest things that contributes towards poverty later in life. It's a nice quote from the school standards advisor, where what she pointed out was that all the other attainment gaps, which I think we actually hear some ways more about in the media certainly and in various other places, the gender gaps, gaps based on ethnicity, when children are born, where you live in the country, all of those gaps are dwarfed by this socioeconomic gap. All of those are far smaller than the gap between richer and poorer kids. Now, when we look at what it is, what our research over the last 5 years has tried to do, is try and understand what is it that's behind those stark statistics. What is it that day by day in children and young people's lives adds up to create these big differences in opportunity? And there are 3 big themes that come through, and I think you've probably talked a fair amount about all of these in one way or another this morning. So obviously children's early experiences, we know that your early home learning environment, so what kind of educational activities parents are doing with their children when they're 3 particularly, reading, counting, painting, all those things makes a big difference. But also services, there's very good evidence now that going to a really good quality preschool and a good quality primary school can do a tremendous amount to counteract the impact of family background. Our research also found, to answer Fergus's question, that children do know their place from a very early age. We found at about 7 or 8, children start being able to say, that kid comes from a richer background than me, he's going to do better in school than me. And we have lots of direct quotes from children saying that. You know, they very much know the score, in a sense, from a very early age. The second theme was about attitudes and relationships. Again, when we listen to children talking about what school is like, what education is like, there are big differences in how in control they feel and how far they feel that school is a place that they can actually achieve. So richer children are much more likely to feel that school is somewhere where they are helped to learn, whereas poorer children will tend to talk much more about school as somewhere they have to go, it's a coercive place a lot of the time, it's somewhere they don't feel they're that likely to do well or be respected. And lastly, and this links into activities outside school and to the general theme of today, we had quite an interesting research project trying to understand what is it that children actually get from out-of-school activities. Is it just nice to do? Is it a general confidence boost? Or does it really do something for formal education? And what we found was that what children who were able to do out-of-school activities, whether they were sport or arts or whatever it was, what they got was a whole range of things, including it affected their own perception of themselves as somebody who could learn and who could take a really active role in learning. It affected relationships with adults. So the fact that whoever was running that club was seen as somebody who was learning alongside them, who was working with them in a cooperative way, that made a big difference. And significantly for children from poorer backgrounds, quite often they had not had that experience before. And of course we know that access to those kinds of activities is very restricted for children from low-income backgrounds. And we explored a bit about why that was, and there were issues not just about direct fees for activities, but even little things like, do you have the bus fare to get somewhere or significantly to get back from somewhere? Those things could be a big enough barrier to stop children being able to take part. But also, again, there were attitudes. In a sense, some young people had got so used to not being able to do things, they decided they were just the kind of person who didn't do stuff like that. And so trying to overcome some of those barriers was vital. We had some new research out this year which tried to look particularly at this issue of aspirations. It's a big buzzword, we talk about it a lot, and we try to understand, well, how important are attitudes and aspirations in direct attainment at school? What we found was there are a number of things that do seem to be really important in explaining that big attainment gap between richer and poorer children. So the first was interesting whether parents and children believed their own actions could affect their lives. That came out very strongly, and it was very different between people from different backgrounds. Second was just believing school is important. Thirdly was aspiring to university. And interestingly, we found that even when you looked at the parents of primary school age children, if your parents were hoping you were going to go to university, that seemed to be linked to higher attainment by the end of primary school. So it seemed to have a big effect quite early. And then there were some behavioural things which parents and teachers and practitioners in the room will be very familiar with, but again came out strongly in helping to explain that big attainment gap between richer and poorer children. So the extent to which the child, the family and the school are coping with hyperactivity or conduct problems and being bullied. That being bullied came through as a theme all the way through the age groups we looked at. If children were being bullied, there was a direct link to attainment. Now, if you put all those things together, they actually help to explain quite a lot of that attainment gap. And therefore, I think they point towards some of the areas that we need to be really trying to focus on to try to break that link. So the key elements of the social gap in children's experiences and outcomes in education. First of all, children from different backgrounds tend to have different kinds of relationships with teachers and with other adults. And children from poorer backgrounds seem to be much less likely to have positive cooperative relationships. Secondly, people tend to have access to different kinds of learning experience outside school. So access to out-of-school activities is very different. Thirdly, this issue of feeling less involved, less in control, less able to play an active part in education. And then the last one, which I think is very important, different perceptions of opportunities in life. So opportunities, both what you can do while you're young and while you're at school, and also what your opportunities are going to be when you leave school or when you leave education. I'm going to come back to that in a sec. So I think the two areas for me that our research points towards saying whatever happens with school structures, whatever happens with the curriculum, we need to really focus on what are the relationships that are going on within all of that, because that seems to be where a lot of the difference lies between children from different backgrounds. And secondly, the perceptions and the reality of opportunities. So I think we need to think not just about do children and young people and families need to somehow be persuaded that there are lots of opportunities if they'll just aspire to them. Because I think our research shows very strongly that actually what a lot of people are doing is making very astute assessments of what is really available to them when they leave school, what the labour market's like, what kind of jobs are out there, and therefore what it's worth trying to do in school. And so what our research suggests is we need to both work on broadening people's horizons, raising aspirations, raising expectations, but also genuinely creating more opportunities, better jobs, more secure jobs, better routes into well-paid work. And we need to do those two things together in order to succeed. Thank you.